Welcome to today's episode of Elevate Your Wealth. And today we're going to be talking about wealth spending. So I think this is actually a fun part of advice where you get to spend the wealth which you've created or just have a spending plan in place. And one of the really important reasons of having a spending plan is you don't want to enslave your current self, but at the same time you don't want to cheat your future self. And that's very important because if you spend too much now, your future self won't be happy. If you save too much now, your future self will be too happy. And we just want to balance that out because you really want to enjoy life now. The way I always think about it is you got to balance the pleasures of today for prosperity tomorrow. So in terms of a spending plan, one of the things you want to think about straight away is um, what do you want now? What do you want in the future? And how do you actually balance that? So I like using numbers to help people think about this. And when I say numbers, percentages in terms of your disposable income. So generally on average, because it really comes down from person to person, but 60% of your disposable income should cover all your general expenses. The big ones like the rent or the mortgage, that should be covered. Your groceries, your dining out, all that should be covered in 60%. Then at the same time, the things that come up in the short term that you don't really plan for, or the expenses that just pop up that you may know about, but you need to be putting money aside. A classic example might be things like your car insurance. You pay that once a year, and it might be something that you just want to put aside consistently. Christmas as well. Christmas, you might be buying gifts for people. You're going to put that money away. So you need to have a short-term bucket. Okay, that short-term bucket, you should be putting at least 10% of your disposable income into that bucket. I sit down with some business owners and some professionals, and we end up putting 20% there because there might be a big item that is planned for in 1 or 2 years' time. They might be wanting a big holiday that they haven't gone for in a while. So all those are very important. And then I really call this one the fun bucket, the YOLO yields, splurge, splash, whatever you want to, however you want to name that account. That's your discretionary bucket. So now in that discretionary bucket, you want to be putting at least 15% in there because you want to really enjoy today as well. And as you go through life, but at the same time, you want to still not spend all you can now because life still goes on, especially if you live a long life, which most people will. You want to ensure that you put in money away. And then the last bucket will be your long-term bucket. So this is your long-term growth. So this is money you're putting away that you do not need for at least the next 10 plus years. You're just putting it away because things come up in the future. And you want to be putting at least 15% in there. The different ways to track this, the different ways to ensure it's done. One way I always tell people to do this is just automate it, especially if you're receiving a salary. You know how much comes in, be it weekly, monthly. Automate it. 15% there, 15% there, 10% there. All of a sudden, life is a lot easier. You don't need to worry about things. You can also use tools. If your income is varied, then you probably need to do that manually, which can be annoying, but it really just helps you look into your discretionary. Okay, in that discretionary, I have $10,000. I can do whatever I want with it. Perfect. You set within a certain limit. So in terms of, people like 25 to 59 and why 59, those will be your working, that will be your working life, I would say. Okay, some people might be 65. You want to constantly do this. These numbers will change from time to time. Just to give you an example, someone in their early 20s or early 30s, you're going to be putting a lot more into your short term because then you probably want to buy a house. Then you probably want to pay for a wedding, pay for a big holiday. While as towards the latter part of life, late 50s, you're going to have a lot less in your short term, a lot less in your long term bucket, and maybe a lot more in your discretionary. So it really comes down to what you want and what stage of life you are in. So, the future things for, people in your early 20s, early 30s that you really need to think about, or even if you don't think about it, you still just want to plan for, because if you plan and you have more money, you're in a better situation or better position than actually not having. So things like holidays, that's a big part of the culture right now of people just traveling and getting to see and experience new things. So you want to constantly put money away for that, a house to live in or a house to pay off. generally in your early 20s, early 30s, you might still go through about 2 to 3 more houses in the future. So you want to ensure you have as much of that paid off as possible. Okay. The other strategies we can talk about in terms of debt recycling, but generally just having enough to have a very low um, debt level on that house is amazing. It definitely gives you a lot more opportunities. If you want kids are a big one, or if you currently have kids as well, you want to constantly put money away for them. I was speaking to a client just a few days ago, and they're in the late 60s, but they still really want to help out the kids. That just never really changes. And she was talking about how her mom wants to help out the great grandkids. Grandkids. So that's always going to be a part of someone's life that has kids or has grandkids. So you always want to put money away for that, even from a young age. Um, One of the good things to spend your YOLO yields on, or your splurge splash, things that actually help you with your health and relationships. They might not be connected to your wealth directly, but they really provide a sense of purpose achievements to you. I think career growth is a good way to actually build your wealth. So if you're spending some of your YOLO yields on that or discretionary income, or for some people, we actually budget that as a short term as well, which just works out well. But those are good things to put your money towards. So career growth, mentors, coaches, people that can actually get you ahead. Those are amazing. And uh, I think holidays play a huge role for lots of people. You get more confidence. Your ability to interact and problem solve is a lot higher. Okay. Sometimes as well, there's a sense of achievement by even just living in Australia. For example, I was very happy that I lived in Australia when I went to Canada, and then I had to shove snow. I was excited about shoving snow, but I was very grateful that I actually live in Australia. So traveling can give you a huge perspective around traveling can give you a huge perspective around things around life and make you appreciate what you have a lot more. So in terms of a spending plan, basically is using buckets, automating that as much as possible, and ensuring you're spending things on the right, spending funds on the right things that give you more value down the track. When it comes to retirement, and look, retirement is very subjective because, for example, I've had a client that retired in their mid 30s just because they had the funds and they could afford to do it. So retirement is not only for those in their early 60s or even late 60s. It can be whenever you have the funds, and if we model things out, that just works for you long term, and you can take care of yourself on the returns on the investments you have. So retirement withdrawal tips or some options we kind of use or put in place from a financial planning perspective. There's the 4% rule. Okay, so the 4% rule is if you want to retire and you're at that stage in life where you've built enough wealth, if you take 4% of the funds you have, and I'll just use $2 million as an example. If you take 4% of that, you're drawing $80,000 every year. Realistically, what happens is if you're invested in 6% stocks and about 40% defensive assets, that money should be able to last you at least 30 years. Okay, so that's a spending plan you can actually have when you finally retire. Taking 4% is a very simple and easy way to know how much you should spend. On that as well, what you can do is you can then top up that amount with inflation every year because the cost of goods go up. And if you can ensure that 80,000 is still purchasing what it should be purchasing for you every year, that'd be good. And using 2% as an example of inflation, it just means you're adding another 1,600 to that balance. So your 80,000 this year will then become 81,600 the next year, and so on and so forth. That is a very simple way to withdraw money from one of your retirement assets or retirement funds. And then that way you can actually ensure you're not spending too much and you still have enough for the future. One of the key ones we use with people is a dynamic withdrawal strategy. So pretty much it's dynamic because it depends on what we earn. And I'll give you an example later on as to a client who this worked well with. It was a little bit of a complex strategy, but I love the complex strategies. I definitely love something I can think about and be like, okay, yep, do that. And that works. I'll talk more about that. But basically, it's like if the market gives you 10% on your $2 million, you spend all of that because that's dynamic. You just spend whatever you get. And the last one as well is using the bucket strategy, which we've spoken about. So you might have different buckets, and I'll give you an example of that as well. One might be a conservative bucket, low risk. When you think about risk, think about 0 to 10, and that low risk might be 3. So what that means is you're only invested in about 30% in stocks, give or take, and the 70% is then in defensive assets. So that's low risk. That shouldn't go up and down too much with the market. And then your other bucket might be high risk. Sometimes you might have 2 to 3 or even 4 buckets. Really depends on a person's situation. However, we'll just use 2 buckets as an example. So your conservative bucket and then your aggressive or high growth bucket would be the other one. So those are the 3 strategies you can use in terms of navigating your spending plan when you do retire. So if we jump into an example, and this example is a client in their 30s who we helped retire, okay, because they had the funds, had come into some money, which was amazing. And when they came into the money at that point in time, it was really understanding, okay, and good on them for actually getting advice, because if they hadn't, they walked me through the initial plan and that wouldn't have worked. Is, well, they wanted to buy a house and they had an idea about that house and they wanted the rest of the funds to last them for the rest of their life. If you think about a 30-year-old or someone in mid-30s, that's pretty much almost 70 years of money just giving you more money that you can live on. So what we had to factor in is, okay, the house, holidays, general living expenses, some discretionary funds as well, because we always want to give flexibility to them. We ended up modeling out about 8 scenarios, and the modeling really helps, people, whether in your 30s or in your 60s, understand how different scenarios will work for them. And what the modeling showed was, this person should only look to buy a house of about 2 million, and the rest of the funds should then be invested in different assets that can then provide the resources they need to sustain them for the rest of their lives. So initially they wanted to buy a $3.5 million house, and after modeling different scenarios, that wouldn't have worked. They would have run out of money, and the key thing was for them not to run out of money. Okay, and what we did after that is, okay, the house amount is put aside. Now, what are we going to do with the remaining funds? We used the bucket strategy for that one. And there was the conservative account, and then there was the aggressive account. So the conservative account was set up just to ensure that, in any 3-year time period, they have enough to fund the living expenses. And what that does is it takes off the pressure both mentally and actually physically on the other high growth account, because if the high growth account, aggressive account, doesn't do well, you're not worried, because you can really take care of yourself for the next 3 years. Most crises we've seen in history, your account might fall for 1 or 2 years, generally not more than that. And when an account is falling, people tend to be scared, but the conservative account ensures that you're not worried, because you can take care of yourself within that period. And over time, what happens is when the high growth account does well, we move money into the conservative account and try to build that so they're always 3 years ahead. Sometimes they might get to 4 years ahead or just 1 year ahead. That's fine. That's part of the strategy, and that's where bucketing helps in terms of ensuring you have enough money to spend for a certain period of time or for the rest of your life. So one of the good things about this strategy just ensures continuity. There's no breakers to you having enough for yourself. And what we needed to really focus on this as well was we still needed to be building this person's super, because over time what happens is by the time you get to 65 and you're within a certain limit, super is the most effective place to have your money. So we wanted to ensure that those accounts are transitioned from outside super into his super at that point in time. However, that's a long period of time. So there was just planning to ensure the super is growing and we're putting more money into that. Why we didn't put the high growth account into super straight away was because, there would be about 30 years before they need access to that money. So we needed to ensure that they could actually take the money and use it anytime. Look, the different complex strategies we could have put on top of this, but this is what the person was comfortable with. So that is how spending and using the bucket strategy can work for you as an individual. If we move on to the dynamic strategy, so this one was an interesting one as well, a little bit complex, but I did like it, and I did really enjoy working with the clients on this one. So this one is a couple who were in their mid 60s, so they were about to retire, and they also had a defined benefit. So for those of you who don't know too much about a defined benefit is generally gold. We like that because the investment risk is actually held with the fund, not yourself as the individual. They just promise to give you a certain amount for the rest of your life, and happy days. You don't need to worry about how it's invested, what's going on. So generally, if we can keep a client in a defined benefit, that is amazing. Very few circumstances we will move them out, but generally we want to keep that, and so you don't have any investment risk. So they had a defined benefit, which was good. It still wasn't enough to cater for all they wanted to spend at that point in time. And one of the key strategies, they wanted to escape the winter in Australia. So they wanted to be able to spend 6 months here. They have family, they have kids here. And then the other 6 months go somewhere else where they like spending time, a little bit warmer, and escape the winter here. So we used a dynamic strategy for this one because the defined benefit covered most of your basic needs. It didn't cover things like, to travel, and it didn't cover other items that they could do without. So they chose to then have a dynamic strategy where once we've invested it and positioned and allocated them in the right places, or located them in the right places, they then used whatever came through to spend. Okay, and a few times we had to take from the capital, but generally that provided more than enough for them. So this is the fun part. Now, for people in the 60s, they usually have a certain amount in super. The certain caps we need to work with, and then usually they'll have some money outside, and they'll want to they'll have a certain risk profile. So risk profile meaning they are comfortable with a certain amount being in growth and a certain amount being in defensive assets. And that plays a huge role because generally, if you have money outside super and you're retired and you're receiving more than $18,200, you will be paying some taxes, give or take. So with this case, what happened was we had to put the high yielding assets in a low tax environment. And we actually had to drill down into each asset class as to, okay, what is the potential yield? And to give you an example, something like REITs, real estate investment trusts, actually have high yields. So generally they will be classed as growth assets and low yield, but now they are actually high yield when you drill down into that aspect. So looking at each asset class, we then had to locate them in different places to ensure we're getting enough tax benefits for them. We don't want them paying taxes. We couldn't just throw everything into super because of caps involved. So we located the high yielding assets in the low tax environment, and that would actually help them save some tax dollars. So we also used a mix of annuities at different points in time. And annuity is pretty much when you give money to an insurance company and they promise to give you that money back over a certain period of time, or they promise to give you that over the lifetime. So we only used it for the shorter setting time frame, 2-3 years, because at that point in time, those rates were better than term deposits and they're better than investment in other investment accounts that are on the low side. So to even complicate things a lot more, they inherited a huge amount of shares. So we then had to build all these assets around that share portfolio. We actually worked with a stockbroker on this one as well to ensure that share portfolio is taken care of. We don't always have to do this, but if there's a huge amount of shares, we generally want to work with one where they can then guide us to, okay, what should be sold, what should be kept. And what we did with this portfolio is over time, we plan to liquidate some of those stocks and transfer some of that money into a more diversified investment portfolio, as well as consider if we can use some of the caps as they come due and put them into super. And one of the main reasons around that was just diversifying away from the concentrated position they had in the stocks. So that's just an example of a dynamic strategy or dynamic spending plan. So all the returns from all those portfolios, super, outside, annuities, and shares were then used towards their spending plan for their holidays. That's just an example of how we can actually help and add value to clients' situation, especially when there are few moving parts in there. So with a spending plan, I always tell people that at the end of the day, it's your money and you just need to decide how you spend it. And doing that in a very sustainable way ensures that you enjoy your money now, but at the same time, you also get to enjoy your money in the future. So I like always giving a summary in as best as I can, using an analogy. So my analogy for this episode is, think about your wealth as planting seeds. So when you save or invest your money, you're planting seeds that will grow over time and then can actually give you a lot more seeds or a lot more income. Okay. So when you choose to invest and when you choose to harvest and then you do harvest the seeds, you still need to ensure that you're putting some back to grow, to provide more wealth for you down the track. Because if you spend all the seeds, you don't get another plant that can actually produce more for you. So you're doing yourself no justice. So you want to plant seeds, you want to harvest carefully, and then you want to replant more seeds to give you more down the track. End of the day, you get to choose and keep all the seeds you want. So the key is balance. Enjoy what you've grown, but always save some seeds to plant again for the future. So takeaways are: have a spending plan, reach out for advice, because that's what we do. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll see you on the flip side.